It began innocently enough, just another quiet patrol for the neighborhood watch. But when Clara noticed luxury cars pulling up to Mr. Benson's garage late at night, her curiosity was piqued. Benson, the elderly recluse known for his worn-out clothes and solitary walks, seemed like the last person to attract such attention. As the watch monitored the comings and goings, their suspicions grew. What was Benson hiding in his garage? Little did they know, their investigation would uncover secrets that could shatter their peaceful community. The neighborhood watch convened at Clara's house the next evening, the mystery of Mr. Benson's late-night visitors hanging heavily in the air. "It's odd, isn't it?" Clara said, pacing in her living room. "He's lived here for years, kept to himself, and now this. Luxury cars showing up at all hours?" Mark, the group's skeptic, leaned back in his chair. "Maybe he's running a garage sale for rich people," he said with a smirk. "Or a wine club. Old guys love wine clubs." Rachel rolled her eyes. "I don't think wine clubs involve pulling into someone's garage in the middle of the night and staying for hours." Peter chimed in, his brow furrowed. "We need to figure out what's going on. If it's something shady, it could affect the whole neighborhood." Clara nodded. "Agreed. Let's monitor his house tonight. If there's more activity, we'll try to get a closer look." That night, the group stationed themselves at strategic points around Benson's property. Clara and Peter hid in the bushes across the street, while Rachel and Mark took a position farther down the block. At 11 p.m., the first car arrived, a sleek black sedan with tinted windows. The driver stepped out, glancing around before entering the garage. Minutes later, faint music and muffled voices began emanating from within. "This is definitely not a wine club," Peter whispered. 2 more cars arrived within the hour, their occupants equally discreet. The garage door remained shut, and despite the growing noise, no one came outside. The watch exchanged concerned glances, their imaginations running wild. "Do you think it's drugs?" Rachel whispered over the walkie-talkie. "Or something worse," Clara replied. "We need to get closer." As the last car pulled in, Clara and Peter crept toward the garage, staying low to the ground. Near the side door, they found a discarded cigar butt and an empty coffee cup. But what caught their attention was a faint glow emanating from a small window. Peering inside, Clara's breath caught. The garage, usually cluttered with tools and junk, had been transformed. Green, felt-topped tables filled the space, surrounded by men and women in fine clothing. A bartender poured drinks in one corner while a roulette wheel spun in another. The low hum of conversation and clinking chips made it unmistakable. They were running a casino. "An underground casino," Peter whispered, his voice tinged with disbelief. "In Benson's garage?" Clara pulled him back before they were spotted. "Let's regroup and figure out our next move." Back at her house, Clara relayed what they'd seen. Mark's jaw dropped. "An underground casino? In our neighborhood? I knew Benson was weird, but this—" Rachel's face was a mix of fear and curiosity. "What do we do? Call the cops?" Clara hesitated. "Not yet. We need more evidence. If we report this now, he could deny everything. Or worse, shut it down before they investigate. Let's watch a little longer and figure out exactly what we're dealing with." The group agreed, though uneasily. As they dispersed for the night, each member couldn't help but wonder how an elderly recluse had pulled off something so elaborate, and what other secrets might be hidden behind the doors of his unassuming garage. The next morning, the neighborhood watch regrouped at Clara's house, their minds still reeling from the discovery of the underground casino. "I can't believe Benson pulled this off," Rachel said, shaking her head. "He's like 80. How is he running a full-blown casino in his garage?" Peter shrugged. "Maybe he's just the face of it. Someone else could be behind it." Mark leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Either way, it's illegal. What's the plan? Are we sneaking back in tonight?" Clara held up a hand to silence them. "We need to tread carefully. Benson might look harmless, but if he's involved in something this big, he's probably not working alone. Let's keep observing and see what else we can find." That evening, Rachel and Mark took the first shift watching Benson's house. As they sat in Rachel's car a few houses down, she noticed something unusual near Benson's garbage bins. "Mark, look at that," she whispered, pointing to a bright red playing card lying on the ground. Mark picked it up with a gloved hand. "Ace of spades. Pretty on brand for a casino." Rachel smirked. "I'm no detective, but I'm pretty sure this isn't a normal piece of trash." As the night wore on, more cars arrived at Benson's garage. Rachel strained to listen as one of the guests spoke on a phone before entering. "High-stakes table tonight. Bring cash," the man said. Rachel's stomach churned. This wasn't just a friendly poker game, it was serious business. The next day, the group reconvened. Rachel held up the playing card as she recounted what she'd overheard. "This is way more organized than we thought. They're doing high-stakes gambling, and they're careful about who they let in." Clara frowned. "It's definitely illegal, but if they're running it this professionally, it's probably not just about gambling. There could be bigger money involved. Money laundering, maybe." Peter leaned forward. "We need more proof. If we can figure out how they're letting people in, maybe one of us can go undercover." Mark raised an eyebrow. "You mean actually go into the casino?" Peter nodded. "Why not? We'll get a first-hand look at how it works. We just need to figure out their entry process." Clara hesitated. "It's risky, but it might be our best shot. Let's keep monitoring tonight and see if we can pick up more clues." That night, Clara and Peter returned to their usual post across the street from Benson's house. It didn't take long for the first car to arrive. This time, Clara noticed something different. The driver leaned out of the window and exchanged what looked like a code word with someone at the door. "Did you hear that?" Clara whispered. Peter shook his head. "No, but I saw it. They're using a code to let people in." As the night wore on, they recorded more of the same interactions. Clara scribbled notes in her notebook, piecing together the pattern. "It's subtle, but every guest either says something or shows something before they're let in." Peter grinned. "Then, all we need to do is figure out the code. Once we crack that, we're in." The group regrouped the next morning, energized by the new lead. Rachel was skeptical. "How do we get the code without tipping them off?" Mark smirked. "Simple. We listen a little closer, and if we can't figure it out, we improvise." Clara nodded, though her gut told her the plan was far from simple. Still, the group was determined. If they could crack the code, they'd finally get inside and uncover the full truth about Benson's underground casino. Clara's heart pounded as the group finalized their plan to send Mark undercover into Benson's garage. After days of watching and listening, they'd pieced together enough of the code to make a convincing attempt. "You're sure you can pull this off?" Clara asked, her voice tinged with worry. Mark grinned. "I've seen enough heist movies to know the drill. Just act confident, right?" Rachel rolled her eyes. "This isn't a movie, Mark. If they catch on, you're in serious trouble." Peter chimed in, his tone cautious. "Remember, you're just there to observe. Get in, see what you can, and get out. Don't do anything that makes them suspicious." Mark nodded, tucking a small recording device into his jacket pocket. "Got it. Let's do this." That evening, Mark approached Benson's garage, dressed sharply to blend in with the well-dressed crowd they'd observed over the past few nights. The garage door was slightly ajar, and a man in a suit stood near the entrance, his sharp eyes scanning each guest. Mark stepped forward, steadying his voice. "High stakes tonight, right?" He glanced at the man's face for a reaction, hoping he'd remembered the code correctly. The man's expression softened, and he gave a slight nod. "Go on in." Mark exhaled quietly and stepped inside. The sight that greeted him was more elaborate than any of them had imagined. The garage had been transformed into a luxurious underground casino. Green, felt-covered poker tables lined the room. A roulette wheel spun in one corner, and slot machines blinked with colorful lights. A bartender served drinks at a sleek counter, and the low hum of jazz music played in the background. Holy, Mark muttered under his breath. He quickly composed himself and moved toward the edge of the room, trying to look inconspicuous. Back at Clara's house, the rest of the group anxiously monitored the recording device from Mark's pocket, which transmitted a live feed. Rachel leaned forward, listening intently to the muffled conversations in the background. This is insane. It's like a Vegas casino in there. Peter adjusted the volume. Wait, listen to this. Mark's voice came through the feed as he struck up a conversation with another guest. So, how long has this place been running? The man chuckled. Longer than you'd think. Benson's got connections, you know? This isn't just a poker night, it's where people make real money. Connections? Mark asked, trying to keep his tone casual. Like what? The man gave him a knowing look. Let's just say Benson isn't the one in charge. He's the face, but the real power, you don't want to mess with them. The group exchanged uneasy glances as they listened. He's talking about a bigger operation, Rachel whispered. This isn't just Benson's thing. Inside the casino, Mark continued observing. He noticed two men in suits standing near the back of the room, their eyes scanning the crowd. They didn't play or talk much, but their presence exuded authority. Mark's gut told him these were the real players. As the night wore on, he inched closer to the bar, pretending to examine a drink menu. He overheard snippets of conversation between the bartender and one of the suited men. The drop's tomorrow night, the man said. Make sure the cash is ready for pickup. Mark's pulse quickened. A drop? Cash? This wasn't just gambling. It was money laundering. Before he could eavesdrop further, a firm hand clapped his shoulder. Mark spun around to see Benson himself, his friendly demeanor offset by a sharp glint in his eye. I don't think we've met before, Benson said, his voice calm but probing. Who invited you? Mark's mind raced. I'm here with Jacob, he blurted, recalling a name he'd overheard earlier. He said this was the place for serious games. Benson studied him for a moment, then nodded. Enjoy yourself, but remember, we don't like strangers asking too many questions. Mark nodded, his heart hammering in his chest. He decided he'd gathered enough and began making his way toward the exit. As he stepped outside into the cool night air, he exhaled deeply, relieved to be out of the lion's den. Back at Clara's house, the group listened intently as Mark recounted his experience. It's way bigger than we thought, he said. Benson might have started it, but someone else is running the show. They're laundering money, and there's a drop happening tomorrow night. Clara's expression hardened. Then tomorrow, we call the police. This isn't just about protecting our neighborhood anymore. It's about stopping something much bigger. The next morning, Clara convened the group at her house, the tension palpable as they prepared for the next steps. Mark sat at the kitchen table, detailing everything he'd seen in the casino. The whole operation is slick. The cash, the suits, the drop they mentioned. It's not just some neighborhood poker game. This is big. Rachel frowned, tapping her pen on a notepad. Did you get anything else on the people running it? Names? Faces? Mark shook his head. Benson's definitely the figurehead, but the real power is with the men in suits. They didn't say much, but they were definitely in charge. Peter leaned forward. What about the drop? Did you catch where it's happening? Mark nodded. I overheard something about the cash being moved tomorrow night. My guess, they're using the casino to launder it, then sending it off to someone higher up. Clara's jaw tightened. If we can figure out where the drop is, we'll have the proof we need to shut this down. That evening, the group stationed themselves near Benson's garage again, hoping to pick up more details. Cars arrived as usual, but this time the atmosphere seemed more subdued. Clara and Peter, hiding across the street, noticed fewer people entering the garage. Looks like they're keeping a low profile, Clara whispered. Maybe they know something's up. Rachel, stationed farther down the block, suddenly radioed in. Guys, Benson just left. He's driving off alone. Peter grabbed his binoculars and spotted Benson's car heading down the street. "He never leaves during these nights," he said. "Something's different." The group quickly decided to follow him. Rachel and Mark tailed Benson's car and Rachel's SUV, keeping a safe distance. After winding through the city, Benson stopped at a small warehouse on the outskirts of town. He got out, looking over his shoulder before entering. Mark squinted through the windshield. "What's a guy like Benson doing at a place like this?" Rachel parked a block away, and the two crept closer. They found a window partially open and peered inside. What they saw made Rachel gasp softly. Inside, several men were counting stacks of cash on a long table. Benson stood nervously at the far end, talking to the same suited men Mark had seen in the casino. Nearby, a black duffel bag sat open, filled with neatly bundled bills. "This is it," Mark whispered. "The drop." Rachel pulled out her phone and snapped a few photos. "We've got the evidence we need. Let's get out of here before they see us." Back at Clara's house, the group reviewed the photos and discussed their next move. "This isn't just about Benson," Peter said, his voice grim. "This warehouse is clearly part of a larger operation. The suits are running the show and they're using Benson as a scapegoat." Clara nodded. "We need to call the police. This has gone way beyond anything we can handle." Mark crossed his arms. "You really think the cops can take down something this big? What if the people running this have connections? What if they get tipped off?" Rachel shot him a sharp look. "What else do you suggest, Mark? We can't just sit here and let them keep laundering money through our neighborhood." Peter raised a hand. "What if we take it a step further? We already know the drop is happening tomorrow night. If we give the police all the evidence and tell them about the drop, they can catch them in the act." Clara considered this, her brow furrowed. "It's risky. If they get wind of the police, they'll disappear. But it's the best shot we've got." The next day, Clara met with Sergeant Harris at the local police station. She laid out the evidence: photos of the casino, audio recordings from Mark's device, and pictures of the warehouse operation. Harris's expression darkened as he reviewed the materials. "This is serious," he said. "If what you're saying is true, this isn't just an illegal casino. It's a front for organized crime." "What about the drop tonight?" Clara asked. "Can you stop it?" Harris nodded. "We'll set up a sting operation. With the evidence you've provided, we have enough to move forward." That evening, the group waited anxiously at Clara's house for updates. Around 10 p.m., Clara's phone buzzed. It was Harris. "We've moved in," he said. "I'll call you as soon as it's over." As the group sat in tense silence, they couldn't help but reflect on how far they'd come. What had started as a suspicious garage had snowballed into a full-blown investigation. Now, everything hinged on whether the police could bring down the operation. Hours later, Harris called back. "We've got them," he said, his voice triumphant. "The suits, the cash, the whole operation. Benson's in custody, too. He's already started talking." Clara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you, Sergeant. This is a huge relief." "You did the right thing bringing this to us," Harris said. "We'll take it from here." As Clara hung up, the group erupted into cheers. The sting had been a success, and their efforts had made a real difference. But as the adrenaline faded, they knew the experience would stay with them. A reminder that even the quietest neighborhoods could hide the darkest secrets. The morning after the sting operation, the neighborhood was buzzing with rumors. News of the police raid had spread quickly, and whispers about Mr. Benson's underground casino and connections to organized crime filled every corner of the community. For the neighborhood watch, however, the story was far from over. Clara and the group gathered at her house, eager to hear more details about what had unfolded. "What's going to happen to Benson?" Rachel asked, her tone a mix of curiosity and concern. Clara shook her head. "Sergeant Harris didn't give me many specifics. He just said Benson was cooperating. I'm guessing that means he's cutting some kind of deal." Mark crossed his arms, still skeptical. "Cooperating? The guy ran an illegal casino and worked with criminals. What's there to cooperate about? Peter chimed in. Maybe he's giving them information on the bigger players. If those suits were running the operation, Benson might have just been a pawn. Clara leaned forward, her voice thoughtful. I want to talk to him. The group fell silent, staring at her. You want to talk to Benson? Mark asked incredulously. Why? Because I need to understand why he did it, Clara said firmly. He's lived here for years. He's always been quiet, kept to himself. Why risk everything for something like this? That afternoon, Clara contacted Sergeant Harris, who agreed to arrange a meeting with Benson. The following day, Clara found herself in a small interrogation room at the police station, facing the man who had been at the center of their neighborhood's upheaval. Benson looked smaller than she remembered, his hunched shoulders and tired eyes a stark contrast to the image of the secret casino mastermind she'd envisioned. He offered a weak smile as she sat down across from him. Didn't expect to see you here, Benson said, his voice raspy. Guess I owe you an explanation. Clara folded her hands on the table. That would be a good place to start. Benson sighed, rubbing his temples. I didn't set out to run a casino. It started small, just a few games with friends to make ends meet. After I retired, the bills kept piling up, and my pension wasn't enough. One of the guys suggested opening it up to a few more people, and before I knew it, it got out of control. Out of control? How? Clara asked. He hesitated, his gaze dropping to the table. A man approached me, said he could help make the operation more profitable. He brought in the suits, the equipment, the cash. I thought it was just business. I didn't realize how deep it went until it was too late. Clara's brow furrowed. You're saying the suits were part of a bigger operation? Benson nodded. They used the casino to launder money. I didn't have a choice once I realized what they were doing. They threatened me, said if I didn't keep quiet, they'd ruin me. I was trapped. Back at Clara's house, she relayed her conversation with Benson to the group. Rachel's expression softened. I can't believe he got caught up in something like that. He didn't seem like the type. Mark, however, wasn't convinced. It sounds like he's just making excuses. He still ran the casino. He still broke the law. Peter interjected. Maybe, but it doesn't sound like he was the mastermind. If the suits were running the show, Benson might have just been a way for them to stay under the radar. Clara nodded. That's exactly what it was. He made bad choices, but he's helping the police now. If his cooperation takes down more of the syndicate, maybe some good can come out of this. Over the next few days, the group kept tabs on the case as more details emerged. News reports revealed that Benson's cooperation had led to additional arrests, and authorities were uncovering more connections to the crime syndicate. Despite his role in the casino, Benson's willingness to provide information had earned him a reduced sentence. For the neighborhood watch, the experience left them with mixed emotions. They had stopped a major criminal operation, but it had come at the cost of uncovering a dark side to their seemingly quiet community. Clara, in particular, couldn't shake the image of Benson in the interrogation room, tired, regretful, and burdened by the choices that had led him there. The revelations about Benson's casino and its ties to a larger syndicate sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. Clara and the group struggled to process the magnitude of what they'd uncovered. What had started as an investigation into suspicious late-night visitors had now grown into a full-blown case involving organized crime. That evening, Peter arrived at Clara's house with new information. I've been digging into the news reports, he said, spreading out a few printed articles on the table. Turns out this isn't the first time the syndicate's been linked to small-town operations. They've used businesses like Benson's casino before to launder money. Restaurants, bars, even a flower shop. Rachel leaned over the articles, her brow furrowed. A flower shop? That's the last place I'd expect a crime syndicate to hide money. Mark scoffed. That's the point. They pick places no one would suspect, and apparently Benson's garage was the perfect cover. Clara nodded, her expression grim. It makes sense. Benson was quiet, unassuming, and already struggling financially. They knew he wouldn't push back. Peter pointed to one of the articles. This says the syndicate is based in the city, but they use outlying towns like ours to keep a low profile. If Benson hadn't gotten involved, they probably would have found someone else. Over the next few days, the group kept their ears to the ground, hoping to learn more about the investigation. Clara contacted Sergeant Harris, who provided limited updates but confirmed that Benson's cooperation was proving invaluable. "He's given us names, locations, and financial records," Harris told her over the phone. "It's going to take time, but we're building a strong case." But as the investigation deepened, so did the risks. One evening, Rachel called Clara in a panic. "I think someone's following me," she said, her voice trembling. "I was driving home from work, and this black SUV stayed behind me for miles. When I turned onto my street, it sped off." Clara's stomach dropped. "Are you safe now?" "Yes," Rachel replied. "But what if it's someone from the syndicate? What if they know we were involved?" Clara did her best to reassure her. "The police have the situation under control, but we'll stay vigilant. If you see that SUV again, call me and the police immediately." The next day, the group convened to discuss Rachel's encounter. "This is exactly what I was worried about," Mark said, his tone sharp. "We're messing with dangerous people. We should have left this to the cops from the start." Peter shook his head. "We couldn't just ignore what was happening. If we hadn't stepped in, the syndicate would still be running the casino right under our noses." Clara raised her hands to calm the group. "What's done is done, but we need to be cautious moving forward. No one goes anywhere alone, and if you notice anything suspicious, report it immediately." Despite their precautions, the unease lingered. Clara found herself constantly looking over her shoulder while Rachel double-checked her locks every night. The once peaceful neighborhood now felt shadowed by the events they'd uncovered. But as days turned into weeks, the group received a glimmer of hope. Harris called Clara with an update. "We've made several more arrests thanks to Benson's information. The syndicate's network is starting to unravel." "That's great news," Clara said, her voice tinged with relief. "Does that mean it's over?" "Not quite," Harris replied. "There are still loose ends, but we've dealt a significant blow to their operation. Your neighborhood should be safe again soon." Clara relayed the news to the group, and for the first time in weeks, they allowed themselves to breathe a little easier. While the syndicate's shadow still loomed, they had taken a critical step toward dismantling it. That evening, Clara sat on her porch reflecting on how much had changed. The neighborhood she once thought of as tranquil had revealed hidden depths of danger and intrigue. Yet, through it all, she and her neighbors had proven that even ordinary people could stand up to extraordinary challenges. The tension in the neighborhood remained palpable even as the police made progress against the syndicate. The members of the neighborhood watch found themselves looking over their shoulders more often, their once simple patrols now tinged with caution. Despite the unease, Clara and her group knew there was still work to be done. "We need to figure out what's next," Clara said during a meeting at her house. "Sergeant Harris said there are loose ends. If we can help tie them up, we'll be closer to putting all of this behind us." Mark frowned, arms crossed. "And what if those loose ends tie us up instead? Rachel was followed, and we're dealing with people who clearly don't play nice." Rachel nodded, still visibly shaken from her encounter with the black SUV. "Mark's not wrong, but if we don't help, who's to say the syndicate won't find a way back into our neighborhood?" Peter leaned forward. "We still have the footage from Mark's night at the casino and the photos of the warehouse drop. Maybe there's something in there we missed, something that could lead us to more of their operations." Clara nodded. "Let's go through everything one more time. If we can find anything that connects to their bigger network, we'll pass it on to Harris." The group spent hours poring over the evidence they'd gathered. Mark's footage from the casino revealed more details than they initially realized. A series of unmarked crates being loaded into a van, a logo faintly visible on the side. Peter paused the footage and pointed at the screen. That logo. Anyone recognize it?" Rachel squinted. "It looks like it belongs to that shipping company downtown. They're everywhere." Clara jotted it down. If the syndicate's using that company, it might be another piece of the puzzle. Next, they revisited the photos Rachel had taken of the warehouse. One of the shots captured a stack of ledgers on the table next to the cash. Rachel slapped the table. "Those ledgers, they're probably full of transaction records. If Harris has those, he could trace their entire operation." Peter frowned. "The question is, did the police seize them during the sting? If not, they might still be in the syndicate's hands." Clara picked up her phone and called Harris. "Sergeant, do you have the ledgers from the warehouse?" There was a pause on the other end before Harris replied. "No, they weren't there when we moved in. We think someone moved them before the sting." "Why?" Clara's stomach sank. "We saw them in the photos. If the ledgers are missing, the syndicate might still be using them to cover their tracks." Harris sighed. "That's troubling. If you find anything that could point us to their location, let me know immediately." The group decided to focus their efforts on the shipping company they'd identified from Mark's footage. Peter and Clara took the lead, staking out the company's downtown warehouse the next evening. From their car, they watched as trucks came and went, noting any patterns or unusual activity. After an hour, a black SUV pulled up to the loading dock. Clara's breath caught. "That's the same SUV Rachel saw." The group's suspicions deepened as two men exited the vehicle and began speaking to a worker near the dock. Peter snapped photos, capturing the interaction. Moments later, the men opened the back of the SUV, revealing crates similar to the ones Mark had seen at the casino. "This is it," Clara whispered. "They're still moving money, or something else." The next morning, Clara met with Harris presenting the new evidence. "The SUV, the crates, the warehouse, it's all connected," she said. "They're still running part of the operation through that shipping company." Harris studied the photos carefully. "This is exactly what we needed. We'll set up surveillance on the warehouse and prepare for another sting. You've done great work, Clara. But this is where you step back and let us handle the rest." Clara agreed, though uneasily. She relayed the plan to the group later that evening. "The police are moving in soon. They'll monitor the warehouse and shut it down. This time, we stay out of it." Mark looked relieved, but Rachel and Peter seemed hesitant. "Are you sure we shouldn't keep an eye on things?" Peter asked. Clara shook her head. "We've done enough. It's time to let the professionals finish what we started." That night, Clara sat on her porch watching the quiet neighborhood. Despite the progress they'd made, she couldn't shake the feeling that the syndicate wasn't finished. For now, though, all they could do was wait and hope the police would bring the operation to an end for good. Days passed as the neighborhood watch anxiously awaited updates from Sergeant Harris. The police had begun surveillance on the downtown shipping warehouse, but Clara and the group felt the weight of their decision to step back. The uncertainty gnawed at them, especially as rumors about the syndicate's activities persisted. One evening, as Clara prepared dinner, her phone buzzed. It was Rachel, her voice panicked. "Clara, I just saw that SUV again. It was parked near the playground. What if they're watching us?" Clara gripped the counter, her heart pounding. "Are you sure it was the same one?" "Positive," Rachel said. "I didn't get too close, but it's definitely them. What should we do?" Clara's mind raced. "Stay inside. I'll call Harris." Harris responded quickly, reassuring Clara that he'd send patrols to check the area. "We've tightened security around your neighborhood," he said. "If the syndicate is trying to intimidate anyone, they'll have to answer to us." But the encounter left the group rattled. When they met that night, the mood was tense. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," Mark said, pacing the room. "We've poked the hornet's nest, and now they're coming after us." Peter shook his head. "If they wanted to do something, they would have already. They're probably just trying to scare us." "That doesn't make it any better," Rachel snapped. "I don't want to live looking over my shoulder." Clara raised her hands, silencing the argument. We knew this wasn't going to be easy, but Harris and his team are closing in. We need to trust that they'll finish this." The next day, Clara received an update from Harris. "We've identified more players in the syndicate," he said. "The shipping company is definitely part of their network. We're planning a coordinated sting operation tomorrow night to shut it down." Clara exhaled, relief washing over her. "Do you think this will end it?" "It'll deal a significant blow," Harris replied, "but these organizations are like hydras. You cut off one head, and another pops up. Still, this will make it much harder for them to operate here." That night, the group gathered at Clara's house waiting for news of the sting. As they sat in tense silence, Peter suddenly stood and pointed to the window. "Someone's outside." Clara froze, her pulse quickening. "Are you sure?" Peter nodded, grabbing his phone. "Stay here. I'll check it out." Ignoring Clara's protests, Peter stepped onto the porch, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, the sound of tires squealing broke the stillness. Peter rushed back inside, his face pale. "It was the SUV. They sped off as soon as I came out." Mark slammed his fist on the table. "That's it. We're not safe here anymore." Clara shook her head. "We're almost there. Once the sting happens, this will be over." The next evening, Harris called with the update they'd been waiting for. "We moved in on the warehouse," he said. "It was a success. We arrested multiple suspects, seized cash, and recovered the missing ledgers. Benson's cooperation was key. He confirmed everything we needed to link the operation to the syndicate." Clara felt a wave of relief but couldn't ignore a lingering sense of unease. "So, it's over." "For now," Harris said. "We've taken out a significant part of their network, but these organizations are persistent. If anything else comes up, we'll act quickly." Clara thanked him and hung up, turning to the group. "The sting was a success. We did it." The group cheered, their relief palpable. But as the excitement faded, the reality of their experience settled in. They had faced more danger than they'd ever imagined, and while they had helped bring down a criminal operation, they knew the fight wasn't entirely over. That night, Clara stood by her window, watching the street. The neighborhood was quiet again, but she knew it would take time to feel truly at peace. The syndicate's presence had left its mark, and she wondered how long it would be before they could move past it. Still, she reminded herself of what they had accomplished. Together, the neighborhood watch had stood up to something far bigger than themselves. They had protected their community, and that was a victory worth holding on to. The day after the police's successful sting on the warehouse, Clara woke up to a rare sense of calm. The neighborhood felt quieter, lighter even, as if the shadow of the syndicate had finally lifted. But she knew better than to assume the fight was entirely over. Later that morning, Sergeant Harris invited the neighborhood watch to the station to review the details of the operation. Clara, Rachel, Peter, and Mark arrived together, eager to hear how their efforts had contributed to the takedown. Harris greeted them warmly, his demeanor a mix of pride and exhaustion. "Thanks to your vigilance and evidence, we were able to shut down the syndicate's operations in this area," he said. "We arrested multiple suspects at the warehouse and recovered the missing ledgers. They're already giving us names of higher-ups." Mark raised an eyebrow. "So, this is just one piece of a bigger puzzle?" Harris nodded. "Unfortunately, yes. But it's a significant piece. With the ledgers, we can trace their financial transactions and build a case against the organization as a whole. It'll take time, but you've helped us make a huge dent." As Harris went over the details of the operation, the group learned more about how the syndicate had used Benson's casino as a front. The ledgers revealed that the money laundered through the garage accounted for millions in illicit funds. The police had also discovered connections to other businesses in nearby towns, confirming that the syndicate's reach extended far beyond their neighborhood. Rachel leaned forward. "What happens to Benson now?" Harris's expression softened. "He's cooperating fully, which is helping his case. He'll likely face a reduced sentence, but he's aware of the consequences of his actions. I think he genuinely regrets getting involved." Peter frowned. "But doesn't that mean the syndicate might come after him?" Harris nodded. "We've placed him in protective custody. He'll be safe while we continue the investigation." Clara exhaled, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. Benson had made terrible choices, but he had also been a victim of circumstances far beyond his control. That evening, the group gathered at Clara's house to reflect on the experience. For the first time in weeks, the mood was light, almost celebratory. "We actually did it," Rachel said, raising her coffee cup in a mock toast. "We helped take down a crime syndicate. How many neighborhood watches can say that?" Mark smirked. "Yeah, and we lived to tell the tale. Barely." Peter chuckled but quickly turned serious. "Still, we should stay vigilant. Harris said the syndicate's bigger than what we saw. They might not be done with this area." Clara nodded. "You're right. But for now, we've done everything we can. We've protected our community, and we've given the police what they need to finish the job." As the night wound down, Clara found herself alone on her porch, staring out at the quiet street. The events of the past few weeks had tested her in ways she never expected, but they had also strengthened her resolve. She and her neighbors had faced danger head-on and had come out stronger on the other side. The sound of laughter from the nearby playground brought a small smile to her face. The neighborhood was healing, slowly but surely, and while there was still work to be done, Clara knew they had taken an important step toward reclaiming their peace. In the days following the police operation, the neighborhood began to feel like its old self again. The shadows that had loomed over the community seemed to lift, replaced by a renewed sense of safety and unity. The members of the Neighborhood Watch, once just casual acquaintances, now shared a bond forged through weeks of uncertainty and danger. Clara called one final meeting at her house, a chance to reflect on everything they had accomplished. The group sat around her dining table, coffee mugs in hand, the atmosphere much lighter than it had been in weeks. "We've come a long way," Clara began, her voice steady. "What started as a few suspicious cars led to uncovering something much bigger than any of us could have imagined. I'm proud of what we've done." Rachel nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It's still hard to believe we were part of taking down a crime syndicate. I mean, we're just regular people." Peter smiled. "Regular people who paid attention and didn't back down. That's how communities stay safe, when we look out for each other." Mark, who had been quiet for most of the meeting, raised his coffee mug. "To the Neighborhood Watch. Not bad for a bunch of nosy neighbors." The group laughed, the tension of the past few weeks finally giving way to genuine relief. But as the laughter subsided, Clara's expression turned serious. "We've done something amazing," she said, "but this doesn't mean we can let our guard down. The syndicate might be gone, but there are always challenges ahead. We need to stay vigilant, not just for ourselves, but for the community." The others nodded in agreement, their resolve clear. They had proven that even ordinary people could make a difference, and they weren't about to let that spirit fade. As the group disbanded, Clara stepped onto her porch, taking a deep breath of the crisp evening air. The street was quiet, the playground across the way bathed in the soft glow of a street lamp. Children's laughter had returned to the neighborhood, a stark contrast to the silence that had hung over it during the height of the syndicate's operations. Clara thought of Mr. Benson. Despite his poor choices, she couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for him. He had been a man caught in a web far bigger than himself, driven by desperation and exploited by those more powerful. She hoped his cooperation with the police would lead to a chance for redemption. The next morning, Clara began drafting a proposal for the Neighborhood Watch. Inspired by their success, she wanted to formalize their efforts, turning their ad hoc patrols into something more organized. She envisioned workshops on community safety, partnerships with local law enforcement, and even neighborhood events to bring people closer together. As she typed, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. What had started as a group of concerned neighbors had become something much greater, a force for good in their community. And while the road ahead might hold new challenges, Clara knew they were ready to face them. That evening, she shared her ideas with the group. Rachel, Peter, and Mark were immediately on board, their enthusiasm infectious. Plans for the first workshop began to take shape, and Clara felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The neighborhood watch wasn't just a response to danger, it was a commitment to the future. As Clara walked home that night, she glanced back at the street where it all began. The garage that had housed Benson's casino was now dark and silent, a reminder of the challenges they had faced. But it was also a testament to the power of ordinary people coming together to protect what mattered most. The neighborhood was safe again, and the future was bright.